We are ready. It's back again. This is one of those ongoing discoveries that our good friend Mel and Murad and Joe now, others will be coming on board. I've just been talking with Mel, and he says, the more I want to stop this, the more I want to go to other areas, the more I want to stop and do other kind of work that needs to be done. Another thing plops into my lap. And today we have something that I think explains an awful lot to me. As I was listening to Mel introduce this earlier, and I was trying to unpack it and trying to think of how the application of this, suddenly it just came to me. This material that we're going to introduce today has ramifications that I think will go not just from what we're saying, but also ramifications that will help us understand the real whoop and woof of where Islam is and what Islam is all about. Material that we're going to introduce today is very confrontational and may be very disturbing to some of you. And we want to warn you. We want to warn you. If you don't want to talk about demonization, if you don't want to talk about possession, don't watch the rest of this video, because we are going to move into a very difficult area, and that has to do with evil spirits. Because what Mel has found, and it's fascinating, not only what he has found, what others have found before him, suggests that Islam was born out of the occult and was born out of everything that we see wrong with the world. And it looks like from the very beginning in the 7th century, this is even before the traditions created the Muhammad that we now know today. It looks like that Islam was birthed in this type of milieu, birthed in this type of environment. And it is not a pretty environment. And in fact, what you're going to find out, what Mel's going to introduce to you, it was birthed in opposition to the only thing that can stop and shut down the demonization or evil spirits, and that's Christianity. And it was birthed in opposition to the very functions and the very forms that Christianity uses to confront demonization. So this is going to be a hard-hitting episode, and I brought Mel on board. Mel, it's good to see you again. I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for coming once again.
Great to be back, Jay, and really looking forward to sharing the material that I've got for you today.
Well, this is hard-hitting material, Mel, and in some ways, we need to be careful how we handle it, and we must be careful also for people who are listening. This will be upsetting for some people, and we need to warn you that beforehand. So, Mel, get right into it and move us along and see what is it you have now uncovered.
Okay, let's share. Can you see that?
It's coming up now, and this is your PowerPoint, and this is where you're going to go and you're going to introduce. So we're talking about the demons, reveal their game plan.
Yeah. Okay, so essentially what we're doing is we're going behind the curtains and looking into the spiritual world of demonology and so on. And just as you mentioned, I'm just going to re-emphasize that due to the nature of this topic, viewer discretion is advised. If you're under 16, psychologically immature, suffer from mental health issues, or likely disturbed by this topic, we obviously don't want to take away your peace or disturb you. So just be warned. That's it really. So to start off, really, what I'd like to talk about first of all is some terminology, the difference between temptation, oppression, and possession, which will be key to understanding this overall topic. So what we mean by temptation is Satan or demons lures a person into doing evil. This is something we all have experience of. We all are human beings who are tempted, but the temptation is external to us. We keep our full free will, and if we decide to give in to that temptation, that's totally on us. But we have complete control over our own bodies, our own will, etc. Now, oppression is different. It's just below full possession. Person may manifest to some degree, contorting, growling, reacting somewhat negatively to sacramentals, and hints of other indications of possession. Whereas possession, in cases of full possession, we see...
Let me just jump in there. When you say negatively to explain what you mean by sacramentals.
Okay, so typical sacramentals are things like crosses, holy water, religious images like icons, anything that's associated with what is holy.
And this is Christian sacramental. This is nothing. This is nothing that. This is not to do with ATRs are these traditional religions that you have in Africa. African
Yeah.
African traditional religions. This is nothing to do with things coming out of the much of the world today that would have
Yeah.
giddy giddies and things like that. You're talking about Christian sacramentals.
Yeah.
Huge.
If you could,
I think that's hugely important, because this is going to have a
yeah.
huge impact as we move on into your talk.
Yeah. Demons are, if you like, are expert theologians, and they would mock and laugh at anything that isn't truly a sacramental. So a sacramental is any object which can lead you to the holy. So these are just aids, essentially, to lead you to God. So, for example, the cross is the prime one. So it's clearly, these objects do create a reaction, because Satan and his demons hate everything that comes from Christ. Anything associated with him in any way, they are fearful of and hate. So when we talk about possession, then it's a higher degree of what we saw in number 2, the oppression. In cases of full possession, we see the demon taking over the body completely. A perfect sign of that would be supernatural strength, occult knowledge, in other words, knowledge of what is hidden, knowledge of all languages, and detecting the holy. Now, about 18 years ago, I had the sort of unique privilege of meeting an exorcist. A friend of a friend said that he was in town. I went to the church to have a conversation with him, talk about his experiences. And he shared some examples of experiences that he had gone through. There was a woman who was a housewife, for example, and was able to speak to him in Greek, and she had no prior knowledge of Greek. She had superhuman strength and attempted to actually shove him out through a window. He received lots of box and kicks from her and so on, but thankfully, through determination and prayer and so on, she was healed. So it's quite an incredible event. I'm sure most of our audience will be familiar with the movie The Exorcist. Probably few of you realize that it's actually based on a true story of a boy in America who went through a possession for months and months. The family had exhausted all the psychologists and psychiatrists and so on, and clearly there was something supernatural involved, because apparently things were levitating off the ground and so on, so it wasn't just a psychological thing. And finally, after months and months of attempts at exorcising him, within the boy, the voice of Saint Michael the Archangel speaks and says, "I am Michael the Archangel, leave him now," or something to that effect. And the boy was healed, and the boy and all his family, who weren't Christians before that, all got baptized after this event. So obviously it had a deeply important effect on them. Obviously, I'm sure most of you are aware that in baptism, a person is automatically exorcised of any evil spirits or even influence and so on. So it protects them and gets rid of any of that evil influence that they may have experienced in their life. So it's a true cleansing and a purification of the person.
And this is really unique to Christianity as well, would you not say, Mel? We don't know of any other religion that has this kind of power, the Holy Spirit that can come and eradicate possession, can eradicate. And that's why Christians are protected. That's why you see many Christians holding crosses. They hold a cross for that very reason, or other icons that they choose. Yeah. Or they call upon the name of Jesus Christ. And listen, I've seen that happen in my own life. My grandmother did this. She would call in the name of Jesus Christ and throw out demons. So not everybody that's listening will understand that, and not everybody that's listening may even agree with that. Yet for those of us who have been part of Christian church and been part of Christian families for, in my case, for generations, this is nothing new. And it is something that is not taught. People don't like to talk about it. That's why we said we need to be careful for those who are coming in on this. Not many of you will feel comfortable with some of the things that Mel's going to bring up. But what we're looking at, and what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the 7th century, and we're going to go back and see how this all began in Islam. So it's important that you do this definition, define it, and show that this does exist. And the only way to stop demonization that we know of, the only way to stop that which is unholy, is to introduce the holy. And the Holy One would be Jesus Christ himself through icons that are part of the church.
Yeah, and it's really important to kind of appreciate that when priests are praying with someone who's possessed, essentially what they are doing is they're confronting the demonic with the authority of Christ. So
Always.
It's Christ who's the one who casts out the evil spirits. So the priests are basically just the privileged role of assisting in a very human manner what Jesus himself is doing,
Or
and
mediating
it's
Christ's name in that
mediating.
context.
Yeah.
And
So
if
this
you
will be
know, for a lot of people who aren't aware of this, just open up the gospel and follow Christ's ministry. Look how many times he cast out demons. He did it for much of his ministry until you cannot say that this did not exist at the time of Jesus, and it should not be at the forefront and at the whole, you might say, foundations of what we do. We need to be aware of the fact that we have power over demons. And for those Muslims who are watching or listening, anybody who is not a Christian, you need to come on home, because we do have that power. We do have that ability. But that's not what we're trying to say today. That's just to introduce it so
Yeah.
we can understand where we're going.
I would say, just in addition, where a person attempts to be holy, the demonic comes out of hiding, because the demonic doesn't need to confront someone who is already mediocre or even not interested. And so you often find saints being challenged. For example, Saint Anthony in the desert, who was a hermit in Egypt, he was often confronted with the demonic, but because of his Christian faith, he was able to repel these evil spirits. He had the power of faith, which protected him and shielded him. So it's very important to bear that in mind. We have nothing to be afraid. One thing I've learned from St. Anthony was that the demons are actually afraid of the grace that's within us as Christians. So that's a reassuring thing to be aware of.
And to say also, Mel, that there are some cases where Christians have been demon possessed, and we're going to talk about that. In fact, in your talk here, where there is one case where that did happen.
Yeah. Yeah, so Christians can be the victims. The fact that you become possessed is not necessarily through personal guilt. Sometimes people dabble in the occult, and that can be like a portal to evil. But sometimes through a curse that someone puts on another person, the demonic enters their lives, into their life. So there's lots of different scenarios. So we shouldn't just assume that in every case is exactly the same. But essentially, what we see in all of this is it's kind of like a custody battle between Jesus and Satan. So Jesus is obviously trying to win back souls. The devil is trying to pencil people's names into his book. And so the exorcist is acting on behalf of Christ to take back souls who have been captured. And that's, for those of us living in today's secular world, that is way out there from what you're used to, because we've learned to kind of think of the world as just being natural and there's nothing supernatural. But actually what we're looking at here is something that's beyond just the natural. And there are plenty of examples of it, especially in today's world, because unfortunately a lot of people have got involved in the New Age movement, and they have opened up portals to evil. And the exorcists have never been as busy as they are currently, unfortunately. So anyway, some of the signs of demonic possession, which is relevant to the 7th century, are contortions, paranormal capabilities, superhuman strength, knowledge of previously unknown languages, particularly when they're talking against Christ. This is nothing like a charismatic form, which is talking in tongues. Unnatural body movements, insults, blasphemies, a detestation for holy objects, cross, icons, holy water, etc. Appearance of wounds that vanish as quickly as they appear. Thinking oneself possessed. Making sounds and movements like an animal. Now, if you imagine an exorcist would be like a doctor who would be looking for symptoms, and these are just some of the symptoms that he would be looking out for.
I don't want to get into it, right? This is not for the place for it. But many of the traditions that in the Islamic traditions that speak about Muhammad, when he was receiving revelations, wahi, these same manifestations happened to him almost all the time. He would get into contortions. He would have superhuman strength where he could lift he would be as strong as 6 men. He would make the sounds of animals. He would go into a stupor. Many times he would froth at the mouth. These are the exact same manifestations that we see in Muhammad's own life from the traditions that speak about him with receiving revelations. So it's fascinating. The very list that you have here could also be applied to Muhammad. As we now know, when Jesus comes back a second time, according to the Islamic traditions, again, when he comes as the Mahdi, the first thing he will do is to destroy all the crosses. So there's again the very thing that actually would protect him is what they're destroying. Anyways, back to you.
The other thing that this is of interest as well, another sign is suicidal inclinations is actually a sign of demonic influence. And we have that with the story of Muhammad trying to throw himself as well off cliff edges and so on. Yeah. Now, two things to bear in mind, and these are from the gospel, so it's good to start with the gospel. Demons are liars, very important. Jesus says in John's gospel, you belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there's no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. So notice two things. The sign of the demonic is lying and violence and murder. These are very telltale signs of the demonic. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
But if you're asking about lying and the father of lies, if you look at Islam, isn't it really full of lies concerning the truth of who God is, the truth of even who Abraham is, the truth of who Ishmael is? If you look all the way through the contradiction after contradiction of the Bible versus the Quran, almost everything we see in the Quran comes down to this very thing. It is full of lie after lie after lie after lie.
Yeah.
And that's why when the Muslims finally read the Bible in the 11th century, Ibn Hazm, the first man to actually read the Bible, his only reaction was the Bible's been corrupted because there's so many differences, because there's so many contradictions between the Bible and the Quran. And I would suggest, well, that what's come here is that the Quran is based on everything that is not Christian, based on everything and against everything that is holy, which all the more supports what we see in John 8.
Yeah. And, it's interesting that very often some members of the Dawa team will show up on our channels and accuse us of lying. And I find that personally very galling, knowing in my heart of hearts, I am an honest person, trying to be very truthful, use evidence, and, just tell it how it is. And it's interesting that a lie is told about myself, essentially. To call someone a liar who's not a liar is a lie. But yeah. So exorcists who act in persona Christi, that means in the person of Christ or on behalf of Christ, have authority over them, which includes compelling them to reveal the truth and also casting them out. So, for example, Mark 6:7 says, calling the 12 to him, he began to send them out 2 by 2 and gave them authority over impure spirits. So that's going to be interesting because obviously we know the devil lies, that's a given. But sometimes the exorcist will actually command the demon to tell the truth. And they will use the authority of Christ to command them to tell the truth. And this is incredibly challenging for a demon to be forced to tell the truth, but they have to obey. This is the irony. They are creatures, they are not God, and they're much lower than God. And so when God forces them, they have to tell the truth. And when they do tell the truth, they reveal their game plan. And this is why this video today has been put together, so that you can all hear what the game plan is, according to the demons revealed to exorcists in the 7th century. Now, from the book, Seeing Islam as Others Saw It, which I'll be referring to extensively today, page 189, he says that the Lakhmids held out as pagans until 593, when the king Newman made his conversion as a result of being relieved by 3 Nestorian churchmen of a demon. So in other words, King Newman was exorcised. That's quite an interesting beginning if we think about the following century, when the very earliest beginnings of Islam were to happen. Now, King Newman is interesting because in 602, he was assassinated by the Persians. And the person who replaced him was Iyas ibn Kapisa, which some of you will recognize as the person who we say was Muhammad.
The first
Muhammad of history. So it's interesting that
Just
This
for those
guy,
people who aren't aware, yeah, Ilyas ibn Kabisa is his formal name. His nickname, or his nom de guerre, as we say, is Muhammad. So therefore,
yeah,
he is a character. He lived in Hira. He lived in what is today Iraq, very close to just southwest of Baghdad. What Hira is called then is the same name of the city that we call today Kufa.
yeah. So what's interesting, you have a king who's possessed, he is exorcised, he becomes a Christian, and then just 9 years later, he's assassinated, and he's replaced by Iyas, who is Muhammad. But according to a Jewish apocalypse, Muhammad himself was possessed. So it's interesting the demons took over again. It is worth remembering what the Jews wrote of their impression of Muhammad. A fragment preserving the opening section of the Secrets of Rabbi Shimon survives among the Cairo Geniza texts, and it says, he, referring to God, raises over them a crazy prophet possessed by a spirit, and he conquers the land for them. And according to Stephen Shoemaker, this originated in the 640s, so it's very contemporary with the time of Muhammad. Okay, so there's a source called Anastasius. He produced 2 collections of edifying tales. The first bears the title Various Narratives of the Humble Monk Anastasius Concerning the Holy Fathers in Sinai, and comprises the doings and sayings of the more charismatic members of the monastery of Sinai, either witnessed by Anastasius himself or related to him by one who was present. And this was put together in the year 660, 1 year after the death of John Climacus. The pre-Islamic Arabs at Sinai seem to have lived in relative peace with the monks and solitaries, seeking their help in time of need and acting as message bearers for them, though occasionally proving a nuisance too. Anastasius clearly does not regard, now notice here Robert Hoyland refers to them as Muslims, which is I would suggest is incorrect.
What's the word that is actually would be that Anastasius would be using here? What's the word he claims him as?
I would say Margarita, yes.
The Magaritai is the Greek word for it. Magre is the Syriac word for it. So really that should be Magaritai. And now let me just jump in here, because this is something that I know people have jumped on us for in the past. And we refer to Robert Hoyland. Here's his book right here. This is a great book. You should get it. And this is the first work that is done on looking and seeing what the people were saying in the 7th century, what was actually being written down. It's a big book. But what he does, unfortunately, is whenever he quotes a section, he doesn't really quote it. He just kind of summarizes a quotation, because the quotations are in Greek. You can't read Greek. Therefore, he does a summarization. And instead of writing the word Magaratai there, he puts in the word Muslim, without thinking through, no, there were no Muslims this early. There is no reference to Muslims this early. And I've heard many people come back to say, Robert Hoyland, there were Muslims. The Anastasius is referring to Muslims. No, it's Magaritai. Now, Magaritai is really the word for Hagarenes. Explain who the Hagarenes are.
Well, the Hagarenes were basically Abrahamists, mostly. There was a mixed bag of them. Some of them were Christians, some were Abrahamists. They believed that they were following the ancient religion of Abraham. They mimicked the Jews in many ways. They followed the Jewish laws. They followed a lot of their customs. Some of the
they look at their lineage back to Hagar. That's why their name's Hagarenes. Yeah. The name Hagar is in. Sometimes they call themselves Ishmaelites because they look at their lineage back to Ishmael. And many of the Arabs in that area saw themselves in direct lineage to Hagar through Ishmael down all the way down then to where they were today. And so when you see the word Magaratai, when you see the word Hagarene, when you see the word Ishmaelite, you're talking about the same people. And these are all Arabs, they are Abrahamists, and they are proto-Islam. They are beginning of Islam, and they are from this part of the world. And many of them are over in the west, in Nabatea or the Nabatean area, and on the east in what today is Baghdad or Iraq.
Absolutely. And, there was a lot of competing preachers at that time, all competing to kind of lead the Arabs in a particular direction in terms of their religious beliefs. So it wasn't as unified as people think at that time. So he says, he calls them the nation that has sullied and profaned the holy summit. And in an account of a vision of fire that had happened on the mountain some years earlier, clearly a miraculous event, he writes angrily of some Saracens also present, who had expressed their disbelief and blasphemed the holy place, its icons and its crosses. He jeers at them, saying that no such miracles had occurred in any other religion or in any synagogue of the Jews or Arabs. So it's interesting, here was an example of a miracle from God, and the Saracens disbelieve in it, even though it's a clear sign, and they blaspheme it, and there's clear hatred against the icons and the crosses, which is, considering what we said about demonic possession, it's interesting that that was the reaction. It doesn't seem a very rational reaction to that event. Now, so just to make a point, exorcists, through the authority of Christ, can command demons to tell the truth and reveal their plans. This is important when we see what the exorcists had written down about what the demons had said to them during the exorcism ritual. Now, Anastasius of Sinai, and there's the source as given by Robert Hoyland, states clearly that the Saracens are in league with demons. Note well that the demons...
in here? Can I just jump in here? Saracens, again, would be another name for Magaratai.
Yeah.
Okay, just be careful, because the Saracens, there were 5 names they referred to themselves there in the 7th century. Hagarenes, that we've already talked about, Ishmaelites that we already talked about, and Magaratai, all of which really are the same root. Saracens was actually the European way of referring to these people. And then the last one they used was Muhajirun. Muhajirun would be people of the Hijr. These are people who are nomadic. All 5 were used to refer to themselves. Nowhere is there any reference to Muslims here. Okay.
Yeah. I think the word Saracen was kind of used ironically because it suggests descendants from Sarah, but they're not descendants of Sarah. So it was kind of a mockery of that situation. So he says, note well that the demons name the Saracens as their companions, and it is with reason. The latter are perhaps even worse than the demons. Indeed, the demons are frequently much afraid of the mysteries of Christ. I mean, his holy body, the cross, the saints, the relics, the holy oils, and many other things. But these demons of flesh, referring to the Saracens, trample all that is under their feet, mock it, set fire to it, destroy it. Now, that could be talking about the 21st century, Jay.
Yeah, the same thing happening today. We just saw what's just 2 weeks ago there in London, where this young man gets up on a church and pulls down the cross. We saw this with the ISIS, where the first thing they did is whenever they went into a town in Iraq, they went to the churches and pulled down the crosses. They went into every one of the museums there in Mosul, and they went into the museums and destroyed any images of Jesus or any of the prophets or any of the saints. And this is typical of what's happening even today in the 21st century. So it's nothing that's new, that's been going on since the 7th century. Yeah. And if you can see, there's an opposition to everything that is sacred, an opposition that to the very thing that would protect them. And it seems that all from the very beginning, it looks like that they were already in cahoots with the demons.
Yeah. And what's interesting here is what the exorcist would tell you is that the demons themselves are afraid of these things. But they would like them to be destroyed, but to get them destroyed, they need humans to do it. And these are the people who he get. So they get these people, the Saracens, to do this. So in order to get them to do it, they have to create an ideology in which they are prepared to destroy these things. So they have, it's all connected.
My sister, who lives in Turkey, had me go, and she wanted me to go look at many of the archaic places, the ancient ruins. And she said, take a look at all the churches. When you go into a church, some of them are still standing. But when you look at the icons along the walls, what's the first thing that the Muslims have done? Muslims have come and scratched off all the faces. They don't want any faces of any saints, of any, especially a face of Jesus Christ. The very things that we want are there to protect us, they're scratching off. Because even today, and this is in the 20th and 21st century, the last 2 centuries, they've been doing this to these artifacts. So you can see where it all comes from. It all begins there in the 7th century. This is pre-Islamic. But it's obvious to me that what you're showing here is that they were in league with demonization. They were in league with anything that was anti-Christian, anything that was holy, the cross, the saints, the relics, the holy oils, all of this. They desecrated. Why? Because they, from the very hoof and hoof was, they must oppose it, without realizing the very thing they're opposing would have been their best protection.
Yeah. Now, what's worth bearing in mind as well is that in Iraqi culture at the time, there was a huge emphasis on magic. They had prayer bowls, which were basically, or incantation bowls, which applied curses to different people and so on. And so you have a lot of people involved in the occult and so on. And this is why we have all of this infestation at that time in the 7th century. And it's interesting, when you go then to the 8th century, it carries on, and you have the period of the iconoclasm, which was introduced, which is again destroying the icons and opposed to the idea of the godly being depicted in pictures. So it's all part of the one hatred towards the holy. Now, he backs this argument with examples. At Damascus, a possessed man named Sartabius was told by his demon that he would be taking temporary leave of him while he accompanied the Arab army on its expedition to the Straits of Abydos of Constantinople, for our prince Satan has sent guards in order that we help our comrades the Saracens on their trip to Constantinople. So, for what it's worth, according to the demon, he was going to help the Saracens, who were the demon's comrades. So they clearly saw the mission of the Saracens as one and the same as their own mission. So the demons were interested in furthering this expedition. So it's very interesting. Now, back in 660, Anastasius had himself witnessed demons participating in the clearing work commissioned by the Margaratai, or Hagarenes, on the Temple Mount. And circa 670, a secretary at Damascus, John of Bostra, was sent on a mission by the governor to interrogate possessed girls at Antioch. And what they discover when they interrogate the possessed girls is very interesting. Via the latter's mouths, the demons within them inform John of Bostra that what they fear most from the Christians is their cross, baptism, and the Eucharist. When asked which among all the faiths of the world they prefer, they reply, that of our companions.
Oh my.
Those who do not have any of the three things of which we have spoken, and those who do not confess the Son of Mary to be God or Son of God. How damaging is that?
My goodness. I mean, this right there. If this is what was in the 7th century, if these are the three things they fear the most, the cross, baptism, and the Eucharist. For those who don't know, what we're talking about, the cross, of course, is the cross of Christ, that he died. And baptism is what we do to show that we are now dead to sin and alive in Christ. And that is a function that we all must go through when we receive faith. And the Eucharist is what you see right there on the right. That's the Eucharist. That's drinking of the wine and eating of the bread. That's referring to Christ's death on the cross, his body and his blood shed for us. Those are at the very center. They are central to Christianity. They're at the very foundations of Christianity. And those three icons right there, cross, baptism, and Eucharist, really define who we are. And if these people in the 7th century were fearful of this, and that their companions are the demons, if this is not a statement of exactly how Islam began, where its roots are, and what it is against, showing to me, at least, I don't know if you agree with this, Mel, or not, it shows me that which created, that which Islam then came out of, at its very beginning, at its very foundations. We saw this with the Dome of the Rock. Look at all the inscriptions are attacking Jesus' divinity. They're attacking the Trinity. They're attacking his sonship. If that is the case that we see on the inscriptions, take a look. This is even earlier. We're seeing that those that created what then became Islam were attacking everything that we see to be holy. The cross, baptism, and Eucharist. You can't get something more specific and more central to Christianity than those three icons right there.
Yeah. Now, to make the point even further, think about, what do the demons want most? Well, they want most to hurt Jesus, right? But they obviously can't hurt Jesus because Jesus is God, okay? So they have to hurt him indirectly. And how do they hurt Jesus indirectly? Is by getting in the way of a person's salvation. So these demons realize that the cross, baptism, and the Eucharist are central. They're the best methods by which a person can get salvation. And they are opposed to it, obviously, because it's so useful.
they're also the icons that remind us of what Jesus is all about. Baptism is the function where we now leave the world and come into Christ's kingdom. And that is the demarcation. That is the all over the world. And all the others know that when you are baptized, you are no longer the former, you are now with Christ in his kingdom. And
Yeah.
Eucharist is to remind us of that death and resurrection. And you cannot say anything else that is more pivotal or central to Christianity than his death and resurrection. So the very
Yeah.
three things that we hold to be absolute, and this is an absolute, this is not, there is no, this is not one of those things that, if or depending on what denomination you belong to, all
Yeah. No.
denominations believe in those three things. All Christians
Absolutely.
everywhere at every time for the last 2,000 years have believed in these three things. And yet these are the three things that are pinpointed as the very things that the Saracens or the Maghraitai did not want anything to do with. And that the demons didn't want anything to do with us, because the demons, the first thing they want us to do, as you just said, Mel, is to get us away from God, to get us away from the cross, to get us away from his death and resurrection. Because without the death and resurrection, we're all damned.
Yeah, that's it. So that's essentially, you're seeing the game plan, and by creating an ideology around this, and you notice I'm using the word ideology rather than religion, because primarily we're talking about an ideology here.
It had not yet become a religion. You're right.
It hadn't. It's the whole purpose of this whole ideology is to indoctrinate people into thinking that the cross and baptism and the Eucharist are bad, have nothing to do with them, but actually that's the very thing that saves you. This is the means by which Christ reaches out and saves us from sin and so on. Okay, so now we look at another source, Daniel, Bishop of Edessa, 665 to 84. So he talks about the following. The monastery of Kenashir in North Syria remained active throughout the 7th century and turned out such respected scholars as Thomas of Heraclea, who revised the New Testament in Syriac. The philosopher and mathematician Severus Sepoke, I think it's pronounced, and the polymath Jacob of Edessa. In the mid-60s, however, it suffered a brief aberration when afflicted by a horde of demons, which is very unusual, as you can imagine, to happen to a monastery. The anonymous Syriac chronicle of 1234, probably relying on the patriarch Dionysius, tells us that in a nearby village, a stone slab inscribed with Median characters was discovered, under which a bronze cauldron containing a bronze figurine. Sorcerers were then summoned, for surely people said it was sorcerers who buried this in days of old. When the sorcerers, whispered their spells over the little idol, it spoke with them, saying, 60,000 demons are imprisoned in this figurine. And the demons asked, how do you command us? Where shall we go? At this, the sorcerers undid the chain from the neck of the figurine and said, go enter the monks of the monastery of Kenashira. Just then, the monks of that abbey began to suffer many misfortunes and ailments. Many became possessed by demons. They began to crow like cocks and to bleat like goats. They insulted the icons of the saints, calling Peter fool fisherman, Paul skinhead, Thomas one ball, John Bar and Fontania long beard, Saint Ephraim dried up, beardless one, and Saint Theodore blind man, and many more perversities did these monks speak. The 12th century patriarch and chronicler Michael the Syrian gives further details of this incident, which cannot be doubted, for they are in the book of that truthful man, the patriarch Dionysius. In the time of Lord Daniel, Bishop of Edessa, demons took possession of certain brothers in the monastery. The abbot sent and called upon Daniel to find some relief for those unfortunates. He told them to go to St. Jacob's and fetch the body of Bishop Severus of Samosata. They, the monks of Keshum, did not want to give him up, but under pressure they granted a part of him. So we're talking here about a relic of a saint. When this was brought near, the demons began to wail, alas for us, that broken one has come. It was not enough for him to drive us from the region of Samosata, but he must come here also. The demons said this, I called him broken one, because of the saint had once fallen from a beast of burden and had been lamed in one foot. So this is an example of occult knowledge. One of those possessed by a demon had formerly been a disciple of the bishop, and they threatened the demon in him, saying, "Now this man's master has come to expel you." The demon answered, "I did not enter this man of my own volition, but under compulsion. He killed our master's dog in the upper vineyard, and for that reason he sent me to torment him. My friends he sent to enter into these monks because they would leave the church at the time of the offering and go out to swim and play in those pools of water outside the monastery." I'll just stop there for a moment. So this is the weak point. The monks were not living entirely up to the rigors of their vocation. And this was enough to, if you like, provide a chink in the armor for the demons to possess them at this time. Our master was what the demons called some sorcerer. As soon as the monks stood, those youths, in front of the right hand of the saint, the demons wailed aloud and came out of them. So why this is important is this is a piece of evidence for the fact that there was widespread infestation in these lands, demonic infestation. And the exorcists at that time would have had quite a job to keep up with it all. This is not the sort of environment in which you'd imagine a new religion would begin. It's not a very healthy environment, let's put it that way. Now,
okay, so and this is just going back to what we said earlier at the very beginning of this episode, that there are times when Christians do and are attacked, specifically attacked, because it's like monks would be the ones who are specifically attacked, and they are weak and they give into it. However, have you noticed in both those cases, the demons were then thrown out. They were then thrown out. So, and the only way they could have been thrown out is with the authority of Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Okay, Jay, would you like to read this next part?
Yeah. The third section begins by explaining that the Chalcedonians had occupied the monastery of Kenishre in the time of Domitianus, bishop of Melitene. That's around 578 to 602. And that then, as now, the Chalcedonians there were claimed by demons. It continues with the report of how, at a later date, the king ordered the Jacobites to bring the demoniacs and the sorcerer before him for adjudication.
No, so this is quite interesting here, because you have the possessed brought before the Arab leader, who's a Saracen. We took the Diophysites and entered before Abdullah bar Darag, emir and governor of Mesopotamia, who was, now notice that Robert Hoyland again is using the word Muslim, but Gabri Magriye. When the sorcerer and the possessed stood before the emir, they, the possessed, blamed the sorcerer and made known that he had sent the demons there to the monastery, and that these demons had suffered many torments and afflictions from these broken ones, the bearded one, and from their fellow saints. The emir asked the head of the demons, "Are you many?" He replied, "I am the leader of 40,000 demons." The emir then said, "Is Jesus, son of Mary, your friend?" The demon answered, "He is my enemy. Today he has no power over me. Once he had power over me, and he will again have a time to prevail over me." The emir said to him, "Are you his servant?" He answered, "No, rather I am the servant of God. Now I am in revolt against him, but in the end he will have authority over me." Now what's interesting, as you can see at the bottom,
oh dear,
is the demon says he is Abdul Allah too, like the emir is an Abdul Allah, rather than a servant of Christ.
Wow. So hold on a minute. Now this is going to cause a little bit of problem. I can see people are going to raise their hands and say, "Are you saying, therefore, that the demons served Allah?" Because Abd means servant of Allah or slave of Allah.
Yeah.
It looks
So
like back in the 7th century, Abd Allah means slave of Allah. This is long before Islam. Remember, Islam has not yet formed. Allah is the word from ilaha, which comes from the Nabatean Aramaic. It's the god, also the generic name for a god of Dushara there in what is today Petra or Jordan. So
Yeah.
Abd Allah, slave of Allah, is what these demons serve. And they make a distinction between this god and the God of Christianity, whose name we know is not Abd Allah. His name is Yahweh. This is the name that he gave to Moses in Exodus chapter 3, when Moses asked him, "What is your name?" So when I go down to Egypt, they can recognize what God I represent. And that was in 1400 BC, which all really brings into a real problem here, because an awful lot of people today will say, yes, but isn't this the name that is in the Bible, in the Arabic Bible? It is the name in the Arabic Bible, but that has been done by the translators who introduced that name in the 7th century actually in the 8th century into the Bible, and they should never have done it, especially now when they see that the demons were the ones that were serving Allah. Which
Yeah.
is a fascinating, because we have said this more and more. Should we be using the name Allah for God? This is another nail in that coffin. Absolutely not. When we see the demons actually followed Allah and made a distinction between this Allah and the God of Christianity and the God of the Bible, Jesus Christ, who then took that name Yahweh for himself in John 8:58 when he was asked, "Are you what you are? How do you know Abraham before Abraham was?" Yahweh, I am. He gave himself that name, and that's why they took stones to stone him. So this is fascinating what you're bringing up here, Mel. Looking at history, all the more reason we must make a distinction between Allah and Yahweh. All the more reason we must make a distinction that Allah is the God that the demons serve. Contradistinction very clearly here from the God of the Christianity and the God of the Bible.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that the word Allah here is ambiguous. So in order to define it, the demon is specifically saying it's not the God as in Jesus. So he's distinguishing himself in terms of who he serves there. Okay, so like to put this into context, there is a Psalm, I believe it's 96:1.
No, it's Psalm 96 verse 5. And also you need to put with that Psalm 106 verse 37, because that refers to the God of the demons, the God of the nations, and the nations worship the demons.
Yeah. So essentially the gods which are associated with any of these pagan religions, essentially, according to the Psalms, are demons in disguise, essentially.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, we'll just move on from here. Now, more exorcisms are carried out when a young man appears with a ring containing a fragment of the cross. The emir's attempt to use his own ring fails, for as the demon asserts, in that one there is no cross, it is the other one we fear. So it's interesting that the demons have more fear of the one that had the cross in it.
Mm. They know where the power comes from. They know where the power comes from.
Yeah. The inferiority of the emir's faith is then demonstrated by the inefficacy of his ring in contrast to that of the Christian youth. Now, so going on from there, the next few slides I'm going to be looking at the fact that it was to the Christians that the proto-Muslims turned to whenever they needed spiritual help, whether that be needing a healing or if they needed an exorcism. So when Ubayd Allah ibn Ziyad, the governor of Iraq, had a problem with his foot, he sought the prayers of Mar Abda, a Christian monk. So it's interesting, it wasn't to their own imams that they sought help. Now, another example. Similar recourse was made by Utbah, governor of Beth Garmai in Kirkuk, to Sabrisho, a metropolitan of the region, regarding 2 of his daughters possessed by demons. So you see, the proto-Muslims are going to the Christians for help whenever they have a problem. Now, here's one that's very interesting indeed. Monks were often in a position to give useful advice since many had studied medicine at school, as was the case with Rabban Kudawi, who was able to cure and subsequently baptize a daughter of the Caliph Muawiyah. And you can see there.
Whoa, hold on a minute. This is the guy we know. This is the same Muawiyah who started the Umayyad dynasty. This is the one that we see on the coins. And I see you got a coin there. That's his coin that he introduced in 663, when the one he'd introduced in 661 was not at all appreciated by the Christians. He then introduces this coin.
Do you see what's in the red squares?
Look what's in the red squares. Those are crosses showing that either he was a Christian. This is why this is fascinating. Now, this is a copper coin from the West. This is not one of the silver coins from the East that he minted in the Iranian mints. This is from the Syrian mints, which are in Syria, what we would call Syria today. And what's fascinating is that though he lived in Damascus, which is in Syria, he was king of the Umayyad dynasty. He was the one that furthered the boundaries of of his kingdom, all the way from the west in Libya, all the way to Afghanistan in the east. Here he has a cross above his head. And here you're telling me that his daughter was baptized. It was
Yep.
subsequently baptized because she had been cured by Christians. Does that
Yep.
mean that he was baptized, that he went ahead and became a Christian because of that as well? And that's why you have the cross there on his hand, and also the cross on his head, and also on the cross on the backside. That's the front and back of the coin,
Yeah.
on the M, which is the denomination of how much it costs.
Yeah. I think he himself was a bit confused religiously. And the fact that we can't define what exactly he was is an indication of that.
And that's true. The coins point that out as well, because in the West, his coins are all Christian. In the East, there's Zoroastrian, because they have the fire altar on the backside of the coins. So he kind of played both sides, knowing that he himself was trying to be resilient to the people he was covering. But that completely confronts the traditional account. That completely confronts the Islamic tradition from the 9th and 10th century, which says very clearly that he was a strong Muslim. But it's fascinating that he had let his daughter be baptized as a Christian.
Yeah. And this is supposedly just a few decades after Muhammad was supposed to have started Islam, and everything is put into place where they don't have icons and so on. And yet here you have coins with people's faces on them. There's crosses on them. It doesn't make sense.
In fact, this continues all the way up to Abdul Malik. You're going to see that. This continues all the way up to Abdul Malik. This completely confronts the notion that the icons, the very thing that they don't want, because that is considered idolatrous. That had nothing to do with Muhammad of the traditions. That had nothing to do of the traditional account of early Islam at all.
Yeah. So now we turn to John of Dalem, who wrote a book called The Syriac Life. He was born in 660, died in 738. He was born in Hadassah in northern Iraq and became a monk at the age of 13. And by the looks of it, he became a very holy monk. At the turn of the century, 700 AD, receiving instruction from God, he went to pray in Jerusalem, and he visited the king of the Arabs, Abdul al-Malik Bar Marwan, who was residing in Damascus at that time. There's a coin from Abdul al-Malik. Now, curing the caliph's daughter earned him a royal missive, which announced to the governor of Bet Arameh and Persia, "Let this holy man build churches and monasteries in our realm, wherever he should wish to do so, and let him be given the expenses out of my royal treasury." So John went to Hajjaj in Iraq and received similar guarantees. Now, what's fascinating about this is a very different picture of Abdul al-Malik, considering when we think about it, he's allowing someone to go and build churches and monasteries, and he's even given him the money for that. He's obviously grateful that he has healed his daughter. What do you make of that, Jay?
Well, this is fascinating. So here's just another example. You're not only talking about the early Muslims who they had to go to Christians to get healed. In this case, we have now got two different caliphs, one at the beginning of the Umayyad Caliphate, which is Muawiyah, whose daughter gets baptized, gets healed and then baptized. Here, in another case, you have another daughter of another caliph, much more powerful. And remember, we're going to see, in fact, just take a look at that coin there. That coin there is Abdul Malik himself. Remember, this is the guy that stood up against Justinian II. And this is the guy that went to war with, that Justinian II went to war with, because he put and introduced the coin with the Shahada on it, the La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, in 692. This is the coin you see here that he introduced in 693, where he now is putting his hand on the sword to then reject Justinian II. So politically speaking, he had nothing at all good to say about the Byzantine or about Byzantine Christianity, because you can see the Shahada there along the outside of the image. Yet at the same time, this case here you have with Abdul Malik, his daughter is healed. She's healed, and because of the fact he's so grateful for the fact that the Christians were the ones who were able to heal her, that he then, rather than, instead of, though he is confronting Byzantine Christianity politically, religiously, he then allows them to build their churches and also their monasteries. Fascinating. So he, again, as a political leader, comes to the Christians and realizes they have something unique that he doesn't.
It could be also that we're talking not about Byzantine Christians here, but maybe monophysites. So he has no problem with them, but he still has a problem with the Byzantine. So that might be why he was willing to do that. Now, what's interesting is There's actually another little detail with all of this. There's more to the story than just healing Abdul Malik's daughter. The caliph needed someone to heal his son who was possessed. So we have another possession story. John of Dalem exorcised Abdul al-Malik's son. This is a key point. In, I think that is book 27 or chapter 27 of his book. It gives us a reason for the meeting with the caliph. News of miracles performed by John of Dalem in Damascus had reached him, and he summoned John to exorcise his son. It also relates how John cured Hajjaj of cancer.
Okay, just so people don't get confused, this is not John of Damascus. This is John of Dalem, but who is doing this in Damascus. And the reason why, that's where Abdul Malik lived. He came to Damascus to do, not only heal his daughter, but also to exorcise his son. And it's fascinating that he had to come to the Christians to do just that very thing. Though he was in opposition to them politically, he realized the real power, at least spiritual power and healing power, came from the Christians.
Yeah, so even though this proto-Islam was cursing the Christians and so on, the Christians were willing to bless those who cursed them and not ask any questions. So it's interesting that he was willing to do this for Abdul al-Malik. It's just a pity that there wasn't a little bit of wider gratitude to Christianity in general, but at least he was given permission to build some churches as a result of this.
And you've got Hajjaj here as well. So go back to that slide. Hajjaj is the governor there in Iraq under Abdul Malik. He is the one that we know that actually redid the Quran and changed 11 verses in the Quran. He's also the one that introduced those first mosques called the in-between mosques in 706. From 706 on, he had about anywhere from 10 to 12 or 13 of these mosques facing that in-between. So he was very pivotal in the introduction of Islam, yet he was healed of cancer by this Christian. So fascinating. These great men of Islam that were coming into what we now know as Islam were absolutely dependent when it came to their healing and when it came to the religious matters or the powers that be against demonization. They had to come to Christians for that kind of healing.
What I find amazing is, like, you have a book such as the Quran that Hajjaj was heavily involved with, which is deeply anti-Christian. He receives this gift of healing, and yet he didn't have the gratitude to kind of transfer that, if you like, into his work with the Quran. It's interesting that he's willing to carry on doing this work with the Quran despite having a religious experience of healing. It's amazing that that didn't convert his heart.
And this is what's fascinating, because if you ask Muslims today, where is there any verse in the Quran that teaches you and tells you and shows you how you can be healed of diseases, or especially of demonization? They cannot tell you, because the Quran is almost completely blank on that measure. It doesn't help you. And that's why you had so many people having to move over to folk Islam, who are Muslims all around the world, because since there's nothing in the Quran that gives you any type of healing or protection from evil spirits. The only thing they can do, and this is what you find when we were living in Senegal in West Africa, they would take pages from the Quran, fold them up, put them into these little leather amulets, and put them on their arm or across their chest or around their midriff, known as giddy-giddies. And these are like talismans, which are pre-Islamic. This is nothing more from ATRs, African traditional religions, which have incorporated this kind of practice. Using the Quran, yes, but as almost like a magical talisman, which for Muslims is anathema. And that's why Muslims all over the world, when I tell them about them, they say, no, that is not Islamic. And then I say, well, what is Islamic? What is it that protects you? Since you don't have anything in the Quran that tells you how to be protected, you have no person you can go to. You can't go to Muhammad. You can't go to Allah. You can't go to anybody. And that's why you're coming to us. That's why you're always coming to us for protection against evil spirits. That's why it's interesting that Abdul Malik had to come to a Christian. Al-Hajjaj had to come to a Christian in order to get that kind of healing. Come on home. Come on home. That's what I love about Christianity. And our Lord, this is the beautiful thing about our Lord. He does protect us. And he did say that you can be protected from any demon just with his name, Jesus Christ, on your lips.
And isn't it amazing that Christ would heal him, despite the fact that everything he's doing in his life is anti-Jesus? And yet Absolutely. Jesus always willing to give the gifts of healing, regardless.
He's always bringing us back to himself, but we have that choice whether to accept or reject. Abdul Malik had that choice. So did Muawiyah have that choice. So did Al-Hajjaj. These are three great characters in the Umayyad Caliphate. Muawiyah in 661, Abd al-Malik in 700, and here you have Hajjaj between 700 and 705, all of whom were healed by Christians in the name of Jesus Christ, yet did not accept where that power comes from. They still remained in their paganism, okay, at least for Muawiyah,
Yeah.
and of course in as Islam was now starting to form with the case of Abd al-Malik and also Hajjaj.
They were likely blinded by a Gnostic version of Jesus, which didn't allow them to see beyond that, to see the true Jesus behind all of the myth, you know. But what's interesting is that even today, Muslims go to monophysite priests in Egypt for exorcisms, as these have the best success at casting out the demons. Why this is the case? Why this is the case is hard to say, but it would appear that the demons fall under the spiritual jurisdiction of monophysite Christianity in that part of the world, which might indicate that perhaps Islam has grown out in some way out of the monophysite community. So there's some influence there, and this is why the demons are willing to obey the priests of the monophysite sect of Christianity. But if any of you are interested, if you look up on YouTube, you'll see plenty of examples of videos where these monophysite priests are exorcising the Muslims. It's quite amazing that that's who they turn to get help, you know.
So they've been doing that for 1,400 years.
Yeah, like, you know, the interesting thing is who is the one that's saving them? It's not Muhammad here. It's Jesus. You know, he's the true savior. You know. Mm-hmm. Okay, now just to give you an overview, then there's a timeline. So just to remind ourselves, 593, the Lakhmid king Numan was exorcised. The 630s, Muhammad was reported by the Jews as possessed, and this was written down sometime in the 640s. In the 660s, the demons declared that the Muslims are their companions. And we also saw examples of widespread infestations of demons and so on. And one example, 665, the monastery there was infested with demons. And then in the year 700, Abd al-Malik's son was exorcised by John of Dalem, Christian priest. So you can see there's a long history of infestation of demons. And this was the ground out of which Islam grew out of. Not a very healthy environment for a new religion. Now, so if we get on to our conclusion then, according to the demon's words while being exorcised, the Margarite were our comrades, our companions. From Numan to Abd al-Malik, we see repeated demonic infestations in the Arab leadership. Any faith which does not have the cross, baptism, or the Eucharist, and that does not confess the Son of Mary to be God or Son of God, is the demon's preferred faith. Clearly, Islam is one of their preferred choices. The Jews record Muhammad as being possessed, and it should also be noted that the Islamic tradition also refers to Muhammad as being bewitched, even using it as an excuse for the satanic verses. Islam grew out of an environment of demonic infestation, but has no response to it at all, as can be evidenced from these 7th century examples. Note also that this explains why much of the Islamic world today is made up of folk Islamic traditions, example, the evil eye, Fatima's hand, and Giri Giri. Those very things that Muslims hated and were fearful of in the 7th century, the cross, baptism, and the Eucharist, are the very things that we love because they are central to everything we believe in Christianity.
Wow.
And there I conclude, Jay.
Well, this has been terrific. Let's go ahead and stop sharing your screen. And I think that, what you have done here, this has been exciting because not only have you brought up, Mel, not only have you brought up some of the real problems that Islam has today. We've seen this. Those of us who've been working in Islam, I've been working in Islam for about 40 years. As I go around the world, what you see is if you put Saudi Arabia as the center, the further you leave from Saudi Arabia, the more you start getting into what we call folk Islam. And folk Islam has been defined as these folk practices, these practices that had pre-existed Islam in all these different cultures. And in West Africa, where we lived for 5 years, they were the giddy-giddies. They put on their arms and their chests and the midriff. And these were just Quranic verses that have been folded up and put into these little leather amulets. for protection, because there is no other protection in Islam. Islam does not protect you. The Quran has no verses for protecting. And that's why, since there is nothing in the Quran to protect us, Dr. Hebert used to call this the excluded middle. What he means by that is that when you look at God up here and man down here, there is this middle part where there are demons and angels. And we in Christianity are aware of this middle part where demons and angels are always living and participating. And the angels come from heaven and they attack the demons and they protect us from the demons that can come down to earth. And so because of that, we have no problem with demonization. But Islam has an excluded middle. This is completely missing. The only thing that you get in this middle part are what they would call jinn. But if you ask a Muslim what jinn are, they can't even define it. Are these creatures made from fire that live on earth? Do they come? They certainly can't get into heaven. In fact, they can't even listen to heaven, because that's what these meteorites are. Every time you look in the sky, they're chasing these demons away from listening to the Quran being recited in heaven. So even the stories that have come up around it don't make much sense. But what is most important, their God, the God of Islam, is totally other, never comes to earth, is incapable of coming to earth. And since he cannot come to earth, he can't protect us. So he stays totally distant. So how are humans protected? How are humans protected from these evil spirits, which are very there? Every culture has them. Go to any culture in the world and you will see demonization is very real for them. They don't have anything. Islam gives them nothing. There's no protection. There is no such thing as exorcism in Islam. That doesn't exist, which suggests to me that if the God of Islam that I know is just made up by man, that whoever made up Islam, and you can see where we are, we know where it's coming from. When you make up a religion, you make it from human intuition and you make it with human logic. And most human logic always, if you look at all man-made religions, they always start from the premise that God is here and man is down here, and neither the twain meet. This is called the dualism that Aristotle talks about. So the Greeks were very aware of this. Now the Greeks at least had these demiurges that went back and forth between them so that God and man can have some type of communication. Islam has replaced that with what they call nabis or rasuls, these prophets, but they are very real humans. You notice none of the prophets can deal with these other beings, these evil beings that are all of us are aware of them. We know they exist. There's demons. And so you can see Muhammad could not deal with them. See how he received his revelations. His wahi, he was full of demonization. There's enormous amount of demon manifestations, possession, frothing at the mouth, falling on the ground, having his feet so heavy there, it's like 6 men couldn't lift them up. Hearing hearing buzzing of bees, the ringing of bells. Falling into a fit. This is demonization, folks. There's no other way to put it. Yet when you look at the description in the traditions, the 9th and 10th traditions of him receiving revelation, this is exactly how he received revelation. Now, here's what's fascinating. In the 7th century, what you're telling me, Mel, that in the 7th century, they knew that demons existed. They knew that there was a problem here. And so those who actually are beginning and starting and rejecting Christianity, they didn't want anything to do with Christianity. They also were part of this demon process. It looks like the demons were the ones that were controlling those who created Islam as we know it. Because when you see them refer to them all the time, what do they always say? We want nothing to know with Jesus Christ. We want nothing to do with the cross. We want nothing to do with the Eucharist. We want nothing to do with baptism. The very 3 things that are the function of Christianity, they have rejected. And it is these people, these Haggarins, these Muggaratai that you're always talking about. The Muggaratai went to that side rather than the other side. The other side are the Christians who are very much part of the gospel, very much part of Jesus Christ, very much part of the Eucharist and baptism and also the cross. And the cross has always been our standard, hasn't it? Since the very beginning, for 2,000 years, we've always held the cross. Isn't it interesting that Islam at its very beginning rejected the cross, rejected baptism, rejected the Eucharist, rejected any icon that had to do with Jesus Christ, and instead went to the demonization? So Islam, what you're saying, Mel, this is a huge thing you're saying. You're saying from the very foundation of Islam, it was based on demonology. It was based on demonization. That's a huge thing to be claiming. But you brought it up, and what you did is you went up and you showed historical reference after historical reference. You went here to Anastasius in 660, who then even refers to them that he's talking about the Muggaratai, mocking the sacraments. There's a choice that was made. So from the very beginning, these Muggaratai, who then became Muslims, these Muggaratai, who are the Saracens, these Haggarins, these Ishmaelites, who are, yes, they are part of the line of Abraham, but they are mocking the sacraments. They have nothing to do with the sacraments. They made a choice from the very beginning. And remember, whatever you start with, it lays the foundation with what is to come later. So they're starting with this rejection of Christianity. They're restarting with the rejection of Jesus Christ. They're restarting with the rejection of his cross, and they're restarting with rejection of the Eucharist, which is body, bled, and shed for those of us who love him.
I just want to jump in there to make a point. An awful lot of the reason why some Muslims are afraid to leave their religion is they're being brainwashed into thinking that if they do, they will go to hell. And what I hope they get from watching this video is the realization, actually, the opposite is true. That, you know, the demons themselves are not are not suggesting that Islam is an opponent to their plans, but very much their comrades. And this should worry you. If the demons think this is their preferred religion, this is their preferred faith, that should be a warning sign. That should be a red flag for Muslims out there. That should be your reason to leave Islam.
You brought Anastasius up, and you've also brought Daniel of Edessa. Beautiful. Because you're saying in the 7th century, this is where it all began. It all began in the 7th century. It all began with Anastasius' writings. He writes about this, and he notices this. Daniel of Edessa, he's talking about the fact that these monks suddenly get possessed. And they get possessed because, as you said, the people who are the demons attack the most tend to be those who are in powers of authority on Christianity. That's why they're attacked. So we can understand it. So be aware of the fact, you Christians who are getting into this kind of work, you are going to be attacked. However, look and see that they were all then protected by the name of Jesus Christ. They were all then protected by the fact that the Holy Spirit came down and confronted. And then you brought in John. Before you brought in John of Dalen, you also went to Muawiyah, and you showed how the beginning of the Umayyad Caliphate. Now that is historical. We don't have a problem with, because he's on the coins. He's written about in the inscriptions. There's lots of references to him. Yes, we're coming to power in 661. He is the first of the Umayyad Caliphates, and he is the one who has a daughter who is baptized. He is the one that has crosses on his head and also on the orb. There on the coins, proving that in the West, at least, he was a Christian. In the East, he would have been a Zoroastrian. But it's fascinating that his daughter is baptized because of the fact that she is eradicated by demonization by the Christians. Let's jump now into 692, because in 692, you have Abd al-Malik, the most famous of the Umayyad caliphs. He is the most powerful of all the Umayyad caliphates. He's part of the Marwan family, comes to power in 685. And in 692, he is confronting the Justinian II, the Byzantine Empire, politically. Yet while he's confronting Justinian II politically, and that's why you saw the coin there with him holding the sword, at the same time, here, two of his children, one gets healed of a problem by a Christian, and this is John of Dalem in 700. This is not to be confused with John of Damascus, though it happens in Damascus. John of Dalem, a Christian, probably of Monophysite, is brought in to heal his daughter, which she is healed. And interestingly, his son is possessed of demons, and he heals him. And that's why he then puts out this reference in 700 that monasteries are to be erected if they want to. And he basically is saying, you Christians can do what you want if you remain in my territory. He's talking about the Monophysite. Well,
I think he gave that right just to this particular priest. It may not have been a general-wide permission.
We don't know, but what we do know is that it's in reaction to what this priest has done for his son. So here you can see and then you have Al-Hajjaj, who is his governor way over in Iraq, over on the east, and his governor, who is also healed of cancer, then also comes out in response to it. Yet these are some of the great men of Islam that are being formed. Muawiyah was not Islamic, of course. We do know that Abd al-Malik was starting in creating the Islam that we now have today, and Hajjaj would have been his governor. So it's fascinating. You're giving 7th century and now early 8th century examples of where, in every case, when Islam, which had already rejected Christianity, rejected the sacraments, rejected the Quran, rejected all these icons, yet when they're in trouble, whenever they have a problem, when their children are sick, or whenever they are possessed with demons, who do they come to? They come to Christian priests. They come to Christianity. And we can say the same thing to you, Muslims. Can you see? For 1,400 years, you have rejected Christianity. For 1,400 years, you have rejected the name of Jesus Christ. For 1,400 years, you have rejected the cross. For 1,400 years, you rejected that Jesus Christ could be Son of God. You rejected the fact that he could be divine. You have rejected the fact of the Trinity. And you have rejected the fact that Jesus, God himself, who came to earth, died and rose again. Your Quran rejects it in chapter 4, verse 157. In every case, that which we hold to be true, that which is the most important for us today, Islam has rejected. And they did just reject it. 100 years or 200 years after the fact, they rejected it at its very foundations. As Islam was starting to be formed, as Muslims, they had not been called themselves that. They were still Maghritai, they were still Saracens, they were still Hagarenes, they were still Ishmaelites and Muhajiruns. That's the names they give themselves. They were already from the very beginning rejecting everything that was holy, everything that was needed. And that's why whenever they got into problem, they had to come to the Christians, because we're the only ones that have really any victory over death. We are the only ones that have victory over demonization. Come on home, folks.
Yeah.
If you want to be protected from demons, if you want to be protected from any type of demonization, you've got to come to Jesus Christ.
What's interesting, and just to reiterate what you've said, is they were able to heal the Caliph's daughters and sons in the name of Jesus as Son of God, not as just Son of Mary alone, but Son of God, and that's key. So it's a rejection, really, of the beliefs that were clearly false. You know, it was under the true name of Jesus that they were healed, and that's really important to.
And that's what's fascinating, because Abdul Malik, when he puts it on his coins, and when he puts it on the Dome of the Rock, and when he puts it on the protocols, he then confronts the associators, those who are the associates. Even though you rebuke us, we will prevail over you. Politically, we will prevail, but not religiously. Those who associate, we don't associate anybody with God. Jesus is God. There are no three gods. And he completely got that wrong. But they saw Christians as associators, and yet he was willing for his daughter and his son to be healed by that very God who he was condemning on his coins. He was condemned on the Dome of the Rock. There's the inconsistency. There's the contradictions. We don't have this inconsistency, do we, Mel? We don't have these contradictions.
It's kind of like someone saying they don't believe in God, and there's an avalanche, and suddenly they're down on their knees praying to God for help, you know? It's the same sort of thing. Push comes to
foxhole Christians is what we call those. Foxhole.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating, because what I love what you've done here, Mel, is you've gone right back to the very beginning. You've gone right back to the origins. We know that these manifestations are all over. And as you said, in the 20th century, in the 21st century, you'll see people, you'll see many taxi drivers with the Fatima's hand on their taxi coming out from the rear mirror, or these beads, which are also used for protection. Or the evil eye you'll see on many, especially in Turkey, on many people's homes. And when you come to West Africa, you'll see the giddy-giddies in all their bodies. Since Islam does not answer this need, Christianity does. And if you don't have an answer for this in Islam, you've got to go back to that, what you're used to. And for them, they are used to the evil eye and Fatimas. And these are pre-Islamic. These are nothing to do with Islam. They are nothing more than folk religions. And that's why we call it folk Islam. Thank God we don't have that problem in Christianity. You don't have to go back to any giddy-giddy. You don't need any evil eye. You don't need any Fatima's hand. You don't need any type of ambulance to protect you against the demons. All you need is the name of Jesus Christ. Come on home. Mel, this has been terrific. This has been exciting. It's a hard-hitting talk you're doing here, and yet it is absolutely historical, because you're going right back and showing you from the very beginning, from the sources that we can see as we're walking through the 7th century. It looks like those who created the beginning of Islam made a choice, and the choice was either to follow Jesus Christ or to follow these demons. And it looks like they followed demons. And I hate to say that. It's hard for you Muslims to hear that. But it looks like at the very core of Islam, the very foundation of Islam, is based on demonization. From the very beginning, they chose to go with the demons rather than going with Christ. You have the same choice. You can either stay with the demons, or you can come home to Jesus Christ. Why don't you come on home? We'd love to have you. It'd be great to introduce you to the real power of Jesus Christ. You won't ever have to fear about walking in the nights again. You won't ever have to fear of being demonized, because as long as you have Christ and what he did on the cross, that's why the cross is so powerful. That's why that young man tried to pull off the cross off that church just 2 weeks ago there in London. That's why ISIS, the first thing they did was to destroy the crosses. That's why even your traditions say that when Messiah comes again, the first thing he's going to do is destroy the crosses. You have such a fear of the cross, and yet it is the cross, the symbol of what Jesus did for us, dying and rising again, that is at the foundation of everything we believe. And you need to believe that as well. Come on home. God bless you. Thanks, Mel. This has been fun. This is going to be a hard-hitting one. I think hopefully that really anybody who then hears how Islam began will realize that Islam has not changed in 1400 years. They are still possessed by demons. And I make no apologies for what I say, but they don't need to be. Come on back to the power of Jesus Christ, his name, and his death and resurrection on the cross. God be with you. Until the next time, this is Mel and Jay, over and out.